Hey y'all. So this week we're against another Guardian. This time it's the OG, the Bravo Showstopper. And let's get into it. Let's see if we can get there this time. And I won the die roll here and chose to go first, naturally. Again, my game plan for this one, as with any Guardian, would just be set up Frost Hexes, set up 1 or 2 Insidious Chills, and play for that endgame. We have made some changes to the list from the experience with Oldham, where I realized like having stuff like CNC in the deck is just not useful. So that's why you see the Skawa in my hand. Honestly, Skawa has a small, minor, slightly extra upside against Bravo as well, because I don't know, if for some reason they try and, if they're playing that Sift Bravo that's going around, or if they just try and heave something and you scour those Seismic Surges in your turn, you can really punish them and get a card stuck in the arsenal. But aside from that, I've removed all the CNCs from the list. Well, I mean, sided them out, rather, for this matchup, and brought in Scourers as blue block 3s. So, anyway, so start of turn, we didn't have anything great to set up. No Frost Hex, Insidious Chill, or even Amulet, sadly. But we go ahead and set up the Channel Lake Frigid. It might stop the opponent from going wide or dominating something. And as always against Guardian, I'm happy arsenaling a D-React. Because, I don't need to try and chip them on their turn. I'm just trying to set up Frost Hexes. Especially against Bravo, who can dominate. Putting a D-React in Arsenal feels good. So we play that, and then we go ahead and Waning Moon. I notice my opponent is not running Earthlaw Bounty, as those Sift Bravos are. So I figured, you know what? I don't need to keep the Skawa. It'd be worth more if I use it, if I just pitch it so I can dig further and find my Frost Hexes. We draw up Hypothermia, again, as I said in the Oldham video. If the Guardian opponent knows what they're doing, they really should be trying to be aggressive on you. That means they should bring in the Zealous Beltings and Arouse the Ancients, and Hypothermia can end up blocking 6 from Arsenal if the timing works out. And other than that, it's a pretty costless card to put in an Arsenal anyway, because you can just play it at any time because it's cost 0. So yeah. Oh yeah, my opponent accidentally left some equipment next to the hero there. Just ignore it. It'll be moved away later. So all they have is a sledge. That iron rod is, it's not there. Cool, so my opponent plays Blessing of Deliverance. Kind of annoying because that'll, gain them some life. And then swings the hammer. It's coming for 6. So this is not dominated, so I decide I'm just gonna keep my D-React in Arsenal. Yeah, I'll just keep the D-React in Arsenal until until I get hit by a dominated thing. Cool. So now we can Tunic up, and I can just go ahead and just play this Hypothermia on my turn, and then pitch my yellow for Waning Moon. And this is why I really like the yellow Sigils of Permafrost, because especially when I'm trying to do the Frost Hex thing, I really only want to see them after I've set up the Frost Hexes, which means I want to see them second cycle. And the yellow is a lot easier to pitch, of course, than the red, but still blocks a decent amount. I mean, the yellow synergizes very well with Waning Moon, which costs 2. So it allows me to do plays like this without sacrificing too much on the block value. If I have the blue that pitches to like anything, but then it only blocks 2, and as we've seen, sometimes late in the game, I can be on a scary low life total that I kind of do need that extra block. Oh, and we just put the Hypothermia on our opponent. It may not do anything, and that's okay, because we have the D-React in our install. Alright, opponent is triggering that Blessing of Deliverance. We do have because it does say beginning of action phase, we actually do have a priority window here, but of course with a D-React in our arsenal, I'm not doing anything. Our opponent goes ahead and gains 3 life. Okay, and then our opponent just comes at us with a Crippling Crash. And pitches exactly 7 for it, so no Bravo dominate. So maybe that card in the hand is not a blue, that they couldn't dominate it, or they didn't want to... Like, something that Bravos need to be afraid of is that if they activate Bravo, it gives you a window of opportunity to respond. And, if I do something like a Winter's Bite that taxes them like 2 resources, that can be pretty annoying for them. So it could be that they're playing around that. So anyway, I go ahead and block 10. I opt to do the Fate Foreseen instead of the Sync, because if I sync away the Blizzard, there's a chance I don't draw back into a blue and I can't even Carnate Peak. Whereas Fate Foreseen is just an opt. And both cards, I mean, dig me deeper to my Frost Hex. But yeah. So now our turn is just a Carnate Peak and we'll Arsenal another D-React. Totally okay doing this. Cool, and we see our first Frost Hex, that's nice. Which basically means, you know, I'd like to block with the other cards. Okay, and opponent activates Bravo, and yeah, this is very risky from their side, because if I have an Ice card in my arsenal, I could give them 1 Frostbite, maybe even tax them 2 if it's like a Winter's Bite or Incarceration or even a Cold Snap. Bit of an asterisk on the Cold Snap. So it's a bit risky for them to do this, but we don't have an Ice card in our arsenal, so we don't punish them for this. But we do have the D-React, so, you know, it's kind of the same thing in the sense of how bad it is for me, because I have the D-React to help with the Dominate anyway, so there we go. Alright, so they come in with Dominate the Crippling Crush, and when they did have to expend everything for this, so yeah, definitely quite risky. But we have the D-React. We also have Tunic up to pay for the Ironhide, so this is perfect. And this is the second Crippling Crush, so, you know, like, the Dominated Crippling Crush is what the Ironhide Gauntlets are there for, so totally okay using that here. Especially when it's conveniently off a Tunic counter. Maybe if, you know, another Dominated Crippling Crush comes at us, we do have Oasis Respites in the deck, and maybe that gets us out of it. But for this one, totally happy to do this. And just take 2, don't get the discard, and then I get to play the Frost Hex on my turn. I also choose not to sync there, because, well, obviously I'll be using 1 blue to set up the Frost Hex, and I actually do want to also set up an Amulet of Ice. So, you know, setting up Frost Hex on my turn and then putting Amulet of Ice in Arsenal feels good to me. So I'm totally going to do that. Also note that pitching Arctic Incarcerations is actually really good. And this will come up in this game, I guess, spoiler. But Arctic Incarceration, once your opponent has 2 Frost Hexes on them, is amazing, because it basically is 6 damage from Arsenal. Because you give them 2 Frostbites, and with 3 Frost Hexes, that represents 6 damage. So those are also cards I want to see later on in the game. So pitching that away and getting to Arsenal, a card I want to set up right now, and the Amulet of Ice, just that works out very well. And we draw up and we see Insidious Chill, another thing we need to set up. So let's see if we're able to. Alright, opponent makes a Seismic Surge. I will not respond to that, I think. Because if I respond to it, give them a Frostbite, then, like, one thing you want to do is try and hide how much disruption you have. Like, they don't know whether I'm going to be taxing them 2 or whether I'm taxing them 1. And if you just immediately do it, then they might be able to do something a little more aggressive. In any case, even if I only give them 1 Frostbite there, it's likely that they're just, the Hammer Swing comes in. The Hammer Swing can come in afterwards anyway, so it's not like I was stopping anything by giving them that Frostbite at that point, so I just opt to hold on to it and make my opponent guess how much I'm going to be taxing them. Alright, so this is coming in for 8, and of course the on-hit does not matter to us at all. So this is something I'm willing to take damage for, because I'm taking the damage to set up an Insidious Chill. Yep, so we go ahead and take 5 there, get crushed with an effect that we don't care about. And yeah, took 5 damage to set up Insidious Chill, which is perfectly fine. And we pitch Ice Eternal as well, again another card that we want to see later on, and don't want to block with right now, because it is a power card later on. So we get to set this up, and we're starting the train. Well, starting the setup. We would like to see at least 1 of the Frost Hex before we, you know, play the Sigil of Permafrost, for example. So second Frost Hex, and then we can maybe start chipping in, and then third Frost Hex is when we can hopefully try and close out the game. The Seismic Surge pops, and for this one, I do respond to it. Again, pitching the yellow Sigil. Again, like I said, I really do enjoy the yellows for how pitchable they are. So I pitched it for this Cold Snap, and I have 1 floating for this Oasis Respite as well. So that feels nice. Also, the reason I responded there instead of waiting further is because I don't want to give my opponent the chance to play out their arsenal before I have a chance to, you know, like try and freeze it. Because if I just hold on to the Cold Snap and they play out the arsenal, then I've lost my opportunity to try and freeze it. So for stuff like Cold Snap, I will try and respond, as soon as I'm able to. My opponent makes a bit of a mistake here, because I did give them the Frostbite, so this Rouse the Ancients actually costs 4, so they can't actually play it while revealing, so, we rewind that a little. Also, our opponent did not pay for the Cold Snap, so the Arsenal is frozen. Also, I do let them take that back as well, like whether they would rather pay, knowing that the Seismic Surge does not discount Rouse the Ancients, but then they choose not to, and they come at me with this Cranial Crush instead, costing them a total of 7, so it does, I do get the entire hand. They do have 2 floating, but the Arsenal's frozen, so I don't need to be scared about a pummel at all. So I pay 1 to Oasis Respite this. Instead of blocking with the Aether Ice Vein, I decide I'm actually going to play it on my turn and, basically try and, chip a little, and also it helps me survive since I have Insidious Chill on the board. It can be a bit of a trap to try and get too conservative when you are, even when you're playing against Guardian, because sometimes there are 5-card hands, as we saw, like Rouse the Ancients and stuff. If you can stop that, then playing Aether Ice Vein on your turn, especially when you have Insidious Chill out, actually you are sort of blocking while also dealing damage. So, while I had the option there to block with my red Aether Ice Vein and just play Respite, and on my turn just Coronet Peak, I figured this is actually just a much stronger play. Because I tax them once from Insidious Chill, and also tax from the Aether Ice Vein on hit. Okay, so our opponent resolves the Insidious Chill trigger by discarding a red pummel. We are definitely very happy to see that. And then I believe that's them, yeah, they're blocking 3 for the Ice Vein, and they take 2. And then for the on-hit discard, let's see what they get up to. When they discard another red pummel. Okay, so we managed to catch our opponent on like a pretty unfortunate hand there, and they get punished by discarding 2 red pummels. So that is really, really good for us. Unfortunately, our remaining Frost Hexes are sort of hiding from us. We have been digging with like Fates, with the Fate and, the Cold Snaps. And we're going to dig again here, so let's hope we can find it. Since this is one of the unfortunate things that can happen to Iyslander sometimes. I just bought myself so much tempo with that play, but then I drew into like a hand that doesn't let me capitalize on it because I'm not setting up anything like a Frost Hex or Insidious Chill. So that's not great. We dig further with the Cold Snap, still don't find another setup card. So, alright. Bit unfortunate there, but it's okay. And we might as well just use the 2 floating to Waning Moon. Opponent blocks all of it. And they will take 1 to the Frostbite from the Frost Hex. Cool, nothing to set up here, so what I want to do is just try and just force as much cards from my opponent as possible. And for that reason, I start with the Winter's Bite, because if my opponent pitches or discards a red card, I can punish them by activating Coronet Peak after this. And that's an amazing trick against aggro, by the way, because typically they'll keep their 1 blue in hand for the resource tax on your turn. So if you ever get in the spot where you can Winter's Bite into Coronet Peak, you can really punish them for pitching or discarding a red for your first tax effect. But anyway, my opponent pitches a blue, so there's no point Coronet Peaking because they'll just do there's use one of their 1 floating. So then I go ahead and do the Ice Bolt instead. I have to say our pitch stack is actually looking pretty decent right now. We have Arcane Incarceration in there. We have 2 of the defense reactions and an Ice Eternal as well. So feeling pretty good about the pitch stack, but we do want to try and get this, get our Frost Hexes out. Alright, so opponent coming at us with a basically vanilla 8. And we do have the option to play the Sigil of Permafrost here. But like I said, that's really something I want to do once I'm at least at 2 Frost Hexes. With just 1 Frost Hex, it feels very not worth it. Because not only is itself a key card in the strategy, it also uses one of my Insidious Chill triggers. So both of them together, it just doesn't feel worth it to use it now. However, I do play the Incarceration out, just to, chip my opponent a little, and pitch this yellow to the Waning Moon. Once again, really stressing how much I like the yellow Sigil Permafrost when I'm doing this game plan for this reason. And our opponent takes all of it. They take the Waning Moon damage and the 2 extra Frostbite damage. So that signals, you know, they have something scary coming up. Let's hope it's a Rouse the Ancients or a Zealous Belting that we can punish with the Hypothermia. And we draw into 2 reds, which is never a fun thing to see when you're on Iyslander, but it does happen sometimes. Okay, then our opponent plays a Terra Sunder. And yeah, and also given that they took all that damage the previous turn from the Frost Hex and the Waning Moon, my read from this is that they want to play this with like a big attack, like more than just the hammer, right? The hammer's like 7, and they know I run D-Reacts. They're probably not planning to do that with that. Not combine Terra Sunder with the hammer. They're probably looking to do like a bigger attack. And so this is kind of scary. Also note that I am trying to set up at least 1 more Frost Hex, most likely both of them. So I really can't afford to get hit by this. Also, I don't have a D-React to protect myself from the discard effect. So I actually decided to pop my Stormstriders here. And I've said before that Stormstriders in Iyslander is not like in Kano where it's like a finisher and you win the game. It is a tempo play. In this case, in the Guardian matchup, it can sometimes be a I need to survive play. Because I still have ideally 2 more Frost Hexes I want to set up. And I also know in my deck I actually haven't seen that many of my D-Reacts yet. And so it's likely that if I use my Stormstriders over here, later on I'll draw into the D-Reacts and the Oasis Respites and try and, you know, survive. And use those to survive, whereas this time I'm forced to use my Striders to survive. Ideally in this matchup, what I want to use the Striders for is a big Freezing Point turn. Like you do a Fused Sigil Permafrost into a Fused Freezing Point, where the Freezing Point comes in for like 8 damage because of 3 Frost Hexes and creates that many Frostbites on your opponent. Pretty much ends the game. But, you know, in certain cases, because, 2 things, the way you draw and the amount of pressure opponents putting on you, maybe you don't get there. And it's totally okay to use the Striders on a red Aether Ice Vein. The other thing that I'm also considering is that I've drawn to 2 Aether Ice Veins, which means the next time I get... And I've already used one of the red Aether Ice Veins, so this is kind of the best Stormstriders play I'm going to have in the game, aside from the Freezing Point thing, which, you know, I don't know if I'm going to get there if I don't survive. So because of that, like all those things considered, with pretty much my only other target for the Striders is the Freezing Point, which is conditional on me surviving and getting Frost Hexes out, I realized that this is probably the best time for me to activate the Striders, so I go ahead and do it here. It triggers Insidious Chill, opponent discards the red Spinal Crush to that. And I do a real quick switcheroo, where I decide to pitch the Winter's Bite instead of the Ice Bolt, and I actually come to regret this later. Anyway, so our opponent takes 5 here and discards another red to this, to the Ice Vein. And then, so now I know basically the only play is the Anathos. But, so I have 2 options here to stop the Anathos. I can either pop Amulet of Ice, or just give them a Frostbite. So I just go ahead and play out this Hypothermia. Gives them a Frostbite, and now they have no hope. And now they absolutely just cannot Anathos. So, yeah. Of course, the other alternative was I could just pitch this Ice Bolt to Waning Moon, so that when Anathos comes in, it's just damage and has no disruption behind it. But remember, I think my life total is very, very key. As I've said earlier, I will take damage for setting up Insidious Shields or Frost Hexes. I do not want to take damage to send 3 damage on a Waning Moon. In this game plan, that will not work, I think. Against aggro, I might, but not against a Guardian. Anyway, so basically what that ended up being is that I used my Stormstriders to stop a Terra Sunder turn, which is, like, on the surface, not an amazing trade, but just knowing that I still have D-Reacts left in the deck and knowing that I want to set up more Frost Hexes, it felt like I had to do that to survive. And our opponent pitched that Embolden at the end to the Frostbite that was going to deal them damage because they don't want to get that stuck in Arsenal. So that was a pretty long rant, but it really just goes to show, I feel like the Stormstriders in Iyslander is very... There's a lot to talk about there. Yeah, because of how different it is from Kano. And then my opponent started to arouse the Ancients, which of course makes me sad because I tossed away the Hypothermia the previous turn. Although then again, the Hypothermia the previous turn stopped 7 damage. In this case, it would only stop 6, so it's probably actually worth it that I did use the Hypothermia the previous turn. But also, just goes to show how much Hypothermia can actually help you in this matchup. I think at first, a lot of Icelanders were like, hey, it's Guardian. I sided the Hypothermia, they're block 2. But then you realize good Guardians do stuff like this into you. And so you want to bring them in. And yeah, here's where I regretted doing that switcheroo. For some reason, I honestly don't remember why why I decided to switch it. But if I had the Winter's Bite in my arsenal now, that would be so much better than having this Ice Bolt, because my opponent has showed me 1 red and 1 blue. Winter's Bite taxes my opponent 2 resources, which means they wouldn't actually be able to swing Sledge if what I had in my arsenal was a Winter's Bite. Instead, what I have is an Ice Bolt, which means that I basically just force my opponent to not have an arsenal, but they still do get to swing their Anathos. Oh, I've been calling it Sledge, I mean Anathos. But they still get to swing the Anathos, so that's a little sad. So that was a mistake. It's like, when I first made my decision to pitch the previous turn, I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna need this Winter's Bite. And then for some reason I backpedaled to put a worse card in my arsenal, so, that was just bad. But anyway, opponent takes the 3, because obviously, they want to just swing that hammer. They don't want to be defensive at this point in the game. They want to punish me for trying to set up Frost X's. And we finally see another Frost X, so that's nice. Along with the D-React, as like I was saying earlier, where I know I still have D-Reacts and Respites left in the deck that can help me survive, so I'm going to use the Stormstriders on that turn. Alright, and our opponent comes in 6 with a hammer. Of course, we are not blocking with his Frost Hex, and we just take that. And then we have a consideration here to activate Tunic and Waning Moon our opponent for 3. And I believe I don't do that because Oasis Respites are still left in the deck. And I know for a fact that I want to pitch a blue to play this Frost Hex, and I won't have any floating from that. So opting not to deal an extra 3 for my opponent here in case I draw something like an Oasis Respite, I still have 2 left in the deck. Whereas if, say I arsenal like a 2-cost thing, like a Channel Frigid, which I don't know why I would against Guardian, but say that is the case, I'd be happier using my Tunic, because I know I'll have 1 left floating to play the Oasis Respite if I do draw into it. Alright, and we're getting a bit of deja vu here. Opponent plays an Arouse the Ancients and again reveals a red and a blue. Yep, so we go ahead and give them a Frostbite. And which basically just forces them to not have an arsenal. And then we do the same thing, block 3 and a D-React. And then they do the same thing and attack us for 6. Ice Eternal, now that my opponent has 2 Frost X's and I still have an Insidious Chill and Amulet of Ice up, I believe I decide to take the 6 here to arsenal this. Oh, the other thing about arsenaling Ice Bolt over Winter's Bite is that honestly, Winter's Bite is just strictly better than Ice Bolt from Arsenal. Because I pitch 2 into the Ice Bolt anyway to deal 3. But with Winter's Bite, I can just play it for free and then pitch 2 into Waning Moon that will also deal 3. And I also still get the Frostbite on my opponent, but I tax them 1 more with the Winter's Bite effect, obviously. So, just honestly, just a massive brain fart moment for me the couple of turns ago where I arsenaled Ice Bolt instead of Winter's Bite. Yeah, just brain fart. And it cost us an extra 6 damage there, to be honest, because allowed our opponent to swing the hammer. So, not feeling good about that. We should be a 17. Anyway, but now we draw into Oasis Respite, and here's where we are rewarded for not using the Tunic the 2 turns ago, because it wouldn't be up at this point. It wouldn't have come back up if we had used it then. So, very glad that I made the decision to keep that. Of course, arsenaling Ice Eternal and then drawing into 2 reds is not great, but it's fine because these D-Reacts will help us survive. So we're good. All right, opponent just makes Seismic. I'm obviously not going to react because I don't have a good Ice Eternal play. And typically, I feel like when the Bravo opponent just makes a Seismic, you can tell the turn. It feels like usually the turn isn't going to be amazing. Because if it was like a big attack, they probably wouldn't make the Seismic Surge for 1, like not to give you the priority window, and number 2, to not potentially get taxed out of it. So, they make a Surge, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is probably just a hammer swing. And we fade foresee and we see our final Frostex on top. Very happy to see that. If only this Oyster's Respite was a sink instead, I could immediately go and grab it. And then, yeah, we have the option to pitch to this Oyster's Respite or just tunic tunic for it. I mean, I guess another option was I blocked with the Icy Tunnel, but I don't want to be left with Oyster's Respite in my hand. It's a red when I already have an Icy Tunnel in my arsenal. And it's not something I want to see in my second cycle either. It's really a card that helps me get to my second cycle. I don't want to see a red in the second cycle. So, although, I mean, I did pitch a red Aether Ice Vein earlier, but that's a bit of a different story because that's an actual threat. And I'll get to that later on. But yeah, so I go ahead and Respite this, blocks the hammer. I'm overblocking by 2, I guess. But it lets me keep Icy Tunnel and Amulet of Ice. Okay, and then our opponent heaves a Thunderquake. And that's actually that's a very risky move by our opponent. Because there's a good chance I can tax them enough such that they can't play that Arsenal card, and then it's stuck there after their Seismic Surges have popped. Like, a case like this is where Scalbo would be amazing. But anyway. They heave it in, and, I say no responses as they move to the end step. But I am looking to punish my opponent for that play of heaving the Thunderquake. So, first thing, I'm just going to play the Amulet of Ice and then pitch to Coronet Peak. And I know I have this Icy Tunnel set up in my arsenal, which means that... And I know there's a Frostex on top, so I know for sure I can fuse this Icy Tunnel. Which means that between the Insidious Chill triggering, how many of the Frostbites I give them from Icy Tunnel, and having an extra Amulet of Ice, I could potentially tax my opponent out of being able to play the Thunderquake. And just leave it stuck in the arsenal. So opponent loses 1 card to Coronet Peak. Yeah, so I mean, all those things combined, right? Set up an Amulet of Ice, tax 1 card from them right now, and Icy Tunnel them on this turn. So we draw into 4 blues this time, which is perfect. So the Seismic Surges pop, and this time I will respond to them. And Seismic Surges are basically just anti-Frostbites, honestly. Each Seismic Surge helps pay for 1 Frostbite, basically. But in addition to the cards I'm going to be taking out of their hand, it could be a lot. Like, for example, if I give them 4 Frostbites, the Thunderquake still costs 6. And that's exactly what I do. I pitch 8 into this Icy Tunnel and fuse it. It uses my last Insidious Chill charge, but I figure that's a worth it trade to keep that just a random bad card stuck in the arsenal. Cool, so opponent discards another pummels. All the pummels have been discarded to like Insidious Chill / Ice Vein type effects. So that feels good. And our opponent has 2 cards remaining. That means if both of them are blues, which they likely are, because they already had 1 red in their hand, the 4 Frostbites I give them, like, they can still pay through it. So I pop an Amulet of Ice to get another card from them, and now, even through 4 Frostbites, there's no way they can pay for that Thunderquake. There we go. So, through the 4 Frostbites, the Thunderquake costs 6, even after the Seismic Surges, so... opponent can't do that. They also can't swing the hammer because the hammer costs 7 because that's not discounted by Seismic Surges. So, yeah. Then now there's 4 Arcane coming at opponent from the Icy Tunnel fusion. And also each Frostbite represents 2 damage. So really, that's basically like a 12 damage turn. It was 4 Arcane from the Icy Tunnel, plus another 8 on the end step from the Frostexes. So really, that turn cycle ended up being I presented 12 damage while also stopping the turn entirely. Although it did cost us our last Insidious Chill and an Amulet of Ice, and those aren't trivial resources. Yep, so our opponent took... they basically blocked out the Icy Tunnel. They were 24. They blocked out the 4 from Icy Tunnel, but then took 8 from Frostexes. And now that Thunderquake is just left in the arsenal, and that feels really good. If our opponent ever, pitches 2 full blues to just play an 8 damage attack, we feel good about that. Then we draw into 3 reds, and this is kind of like a 5% probability hand, which is, obviously that's bad. But yeah, let's see what we can do. Also, Oyster's Respite when you don't have Tunic up is a little unfortunate. Is not amazing. unless you're able to, also like Waning Moon or something. But with Frost Hex in our arsenal, we actually can't do that. So, cool. And I'm deciding whether I'm responding to this Blessing of Deliverance, and I decide I'm not going to. Again, just trying to hide how much disruption I have. Oh, wait, no, actually, no, my opponent knows I have a Frost Hex in arsenal, so there's actually nothing hiding here. Oh, yeah, my decision here was that I might need to block. Especially with all these, like, reds. There's a good chance I just might need to like block a bunch and not be able to play this Frost Hex this turn. So let me just wait to see what my opponent does. Although, yeah, just looking at this, I feel like my best play is to play out the Frost Hex and Arsenal Oasis Respite on my turn. Because Oasis Respite right now, without getting it off of Tunic, is just a little low value. But once I put in my Arsenal, the next turn, on my opponent's next turn, I will have the Tunic up. So then there'll be a lot more value. Yep, opponent just comes at us with an 8 damage attack. And we go ahead and Fate Foreseen, and I send the Freezing Point to the bottom, because I know I'm already going to be arsenaling an Oasis Respite on my turn, and so I don't want to be holding on to, like, another red, basically. Also, that is the last Freezing Point I have blocked with the other two, so that is something I do. That is another sort of resource, because that card now threatens 8 damage now that I have all 3 Frost Hexes on them. So, got to, even though it's a red and you don't want to see reds on the second cycle that much, the only reds remaining in my deck right now are, there might be a couple of D-Reacts or another Respite, I'm not keeping track of those, but in terms of threats, Aether, Ice Vein, and Freezing Point are only threats remaining. And you do still kind of want some of them, and I'll go over why as we transition to this stage of the game where you already have 3 Frost Hexes, and I'll talk about it when it becomes relevant. Alright, so Blessing of Deliverance pops. Opponent gains 2 life. And we've drawn up into the Sigil of Permafrost that we pitched all that time ago. But, of course, as an Oasis Respite in our arsenal, so we actually can't use the Sigil. I mean, we can't meaningfully use the Sigil of Permafrost. But it's fine if we can... But with the Oasis Respite and blocking with Ice Bolt and Scour, we can present 10 block on this turn. Well, effectively 11 if you count the life we gain from the Oasis Respite, and get to Arsenal Winter's Bite, which is a card we can use with the Sigil of Permafrost next turn. But all our opponent does is Spinal Crush, and since that Thunderquake is face up in Arsenal, we know we don't need to be scared of a pummel at all. So I believe I opt to just block with one of my 3 blocks and Oasis Respite, so that on my turn I can Coronet Peak. I feel like that should be the play I did, I really hope I did. And yeah, it looks like that is what I did. So I gain a life here and then take 2. So effectively, I just took 1 this turn, and I get to Coronet Peak my opponent, Arsenal the Winter's Bite, have Sigil of Permafrost in my hand. Alright, opponent discards a red, as opposed to pitching it. Again, like, we're both on the same mindset here, where we don't... At least they definitely should be in this mindset, where they kind of don't want to see reds again. If we ever get to 3rd cycle, which I'm not sure whether we will, but, just in the event that happens, they don't want to see reds. Okay, and then they finally, play out this Thunderquake, because they had no other good play to do. And this is just 8 damage. Again, no way they're representing a pummel. So that's very nice. And with the Winter's Bite, I basically force that last card from my opponent, and give them 1 Frostbite. Then along with the Sigil of Permafrost and a Frostbite that will deal, get to chip in for a decent amount this turn. And just looking at this, I believe I should block with the Ice Eternal, funnily enough. Because I believe, if I'm remembering my pitch stack correctly, I should be seeing another yellow Sigil coming up. And Sigil of Permafrost works much better with a 0 cost from Arsenal rather than something like Ice Eternal. But of course, before I decide to block with Ice Eternal, I just check my graveyard to make sure this isn't the last one. And it isn't. Yes, the other one is also in the pitch stack somewhere. It should be coming up soon. And here's where I talked about pretty early in the game, Arctic Incarceration feels so much stronger later in the game when they already have 3 Frost Hexes, rather than, early in the game where it's just taxing them too. So yep, go ahead and block this Ice Eternal, and I get to play this other Sigil, fuse it, and then also Waning Moon my opponent. And then Arsenal, Arsenal Arctic Incarceration, which is basically 6 damage from Arsenal. because of 3 Frost X's, and I know there's another yellow. I have another one of these sigils coming up. So, yeah. Yep, opponent takes 1 from the Waning Moon, gets an extra Frostbite, and then takes 6 from Frost X's. And they don't have an arsenal, so we're feeling really good, and we also arsenaling this Arctic Incarceration. And so on our turn, we just tunic up and draw up, and there we go. That is our other yellow Sigil of Permafrost. Ooh, opponent has another blessing. That'll gain them some life. That'll be pretty annoying. They've gained 5 lives so far from their first 2 blessings. And again, we draw into another Arctic Incarceration, which is nice. And we don't respond to the blessing. So here's the thing: we could respond with Arctic Incarceration to like tax the Anothos a bit more. Like they would need to put 2 cards to swing with Anothos, but I would rather just like let them have the cheaper Anothos for 6 damage, because if they actually swing with Anothos, that means they pop the Frostbites, which means that the Frost X's, the Frostbites won't deal damage at the end of turn because they don't exist. So I prioritize the damage, especially since I know that I can block. I can block 3 and put the Sigil in front of it, and even be safe like through a pummel or something. So it's not necessary for me to tax Anothos. At this point, I want to be more aggressive. And here's where the game has kind of shifted a little, like the role playing. So early on, my opponent was the aggressor, but now that they have 3 Frost Hexes, you can see that they are trying to be a little more conservative as well. Instead of coming at me with like a big attack, they're like, you know what, I'm just gonna hammer and keep the remaining cards in my hand. And so here's where what I said earlier about having like 1 or 2 reds still left in the deck really comes in handy, because then I can put more pressure on my turn, forcing cards out of their hand on my turn, so that on their turn they have fewer cards to be defensive like this. Anyway, so yeah, so we go ahead and fuse, and then I respond, and then I also pop my Amulet of Ice. Oh, I let it go to damage first, before popping the Amulet of Ice. We block the full 6, and yeah, cool. And our opponent had 1 floating, and they pitch another 1, and then we go ahead and incarcerate them, give them 2 Frostbites, and then Waning Moon, which will threaten. Which may they could pitch completely to block all of it, because they do have AB3. Which they should, because each extra point that they take is an extra 2 damage, because of the extra Frostbite it'll deal. Yeah. So they do pitch to block the Waning Moon completely, and they will just take 6 from the Frostbites and go to 3. So yeah, Arctic Incarceration, just an amazingly valuable card to have in the endgame. And we get to arsenal another one. And these were all, they were pitch stacked, like, deliberately, so, because of their potency in the endgame. Alright, so we draw up, and we draw into the red that I was talking about. And it's, okay, so it is not necessary to keep reds in the deck for the, for this endgame state where the Guardian opponent pivots to being more defensive. Also, they just healed up 3 from that 3rd blessing. Pretty annoying. It's not necessary. The alternative is if you still have some Insidious Chills up. Like if I had some Insidious Chills up or another Amulet of Ice, then I don't need this red. I don't need to see this red again later in the game. But because I use those Insidious Chills to basically survive, having the red is really, really valuable. Because my opponent at this point isn't going to, empty themselves to like come at me with a big attack. And so I need to make sure that I force cards out of them on my turn. Alright, opponent makes a surge, and I can totally expect that they're just going to be swinging the ham after, so they keep their defenses up, basically. Alright, and they swing the hammer, and I'm trying to figure out a way that I can send this arcane damage at my opponent. Yeah, so the thing is, without Insidious Chills or Amulets of Ice, there kind of is not much of a point to play the Sigil of Permafrost. Because yeah, it'll make my Waning Moon give them Frostbites, but they have plenty of cards just to pitch and stop that. So So yeah, there's not much point to play my arsenal and fuse the Sigil of Permafrost and hope for Waning Moon. So I actually think what the correct play here might be is to just use Tunic to play out the Sigil of Permafrost. And don't bother the fusing and don't play my arsenal card. So then I just take 3 and I'm also safe through, well, any color of Pummel. So that on my turn, I can deal them 5 damage, which threatens a non-hit. Deal them a further 2 from Waning Moon, so that when it finally goes to their turn, a bunch of the cards have been taxed out. And then I can RT Incarceration at that point to deal another 6 at the end of their turn. Instead, I put Coronet Peak in front of it, which I guess I don't hate. Because, I mean, I know all the red pummels are in the graveyard, so even if my opponent has a yellow pummel, I still survive. And I get to do this while saving the Sigil of Permafrost in my hand. Yeah, I guess that's another... Yeah, I don't hate this line. But I do wonder whether just tunicking out Sigil might have just made more sense. Anyway, so we go ahead and fuse this Ice Vein. Opponent takes 2, like pitches 3, takes 2, and discards... and pays another 2 for the effect. And then I pitch the Aether Hail for Waning Moon, coming in for 2. Yeah, and actually, the reason why I don't like this play that much is because if I tax them this much on their turn, my opponent's actually very incentivized to just not attack me on their turn. And so holding onto his D-React just looks kind of dumb. So, yeah, I think I made a mistake here. I should have just tunicked out the Sigil of Permafrost. And then do this exact remaining thing on my turn, but I still have my Coronet Peak up, and I take 1 less damage. So, yeah. Opponent just blocks 1 with their 1 floating, opting to keep cards for when it comes to their turn. And we basically have 9 damage, because 6 from the Incarceration in our arsenal and 3 extra from Waning Moon, so we basically are threatening lethal, even our opponent doesn't attack us. So we're feeling good, but yeah. I think keeping the Sigil of Permafrost was not a good idea. Cool. Our opponent remakes the Surge, and then comes at us with the Hammer. This is coming in for 6. But they only have 2 float, so we have the coast clear. We kind of had the coast clear even if they didn't attack. But yeah. So, yep, go ahead and do the Incarceration. And go ahead and, yeah. And we do the Incarceration, before reactions, just in case the Arsenal cards are pummel, we just don't need to play around it. Because now the pummel costs 4, since we haven't gone to reactions. I didn't go to reactions before playing the Incarceration. Of course, now to play the Sigil, I go to reactions. But the pummel costs too much now, so they can't do it. And then they just take 1 from the Waning Moon, get a 3rd Frostbite, and they'll take 9 at the end of the turn, and we get there. So yeah, I think there was a good showcase of just how dynamic this game can be. It's really very interesting how the aggressor kind of switches and kind of has to switch towards the end of the game, where it turned out that at the end I'm keeping the red in my hand, taking damage to send a red attack. Because my opponent isn't exposing themselves enough on their turn because I already have 3 Frost Hexes out. Yep, so there we go. That was the game. Thank you for watching and hope you enjoyed it.